My sister built an $8 million company from a second-hand laptop and sleepless nights. I, on the other hand, once forgot my student ID and had to barter granola bars for a library printer code. It was fall 2015, and I was a college junior barely hanging on to my financial aid and part-time tutoring job. The day I showed up at Madeline's apartment, the humidity clung to me like guilt. She opened the door wearing a faded t-shirt with a local tech incubator's logo and sweatpants that had definitely seen better days. Her hair was twisted into a messy bun, and her eyes, though sharp, looked like they hadn't seen sleep in a week. "You okay?" she asked, stepping aside to let me in. I nodded, stepping over a bundle of Ethernet cords and whiteboard markers. The small living room looked like a startup had exploded, half-empty coffee mugs, printouts of user flows, sticky notes on every surface. A folding table acted as a desk. One leg was propped up with a worn textbook on business analytics. "I hate asking," I said, shifting from foot to foot. Madeline sat on the edge of the futon, laptop still open beside her. She didn't ask for details. Didn't sigh. Just reached over to a drawer near the kitchen and pulled out an envelope. Inside was $500 in crisp 20s, folded into a yellow sticky note. It read, "Keep going." I stood there, unsure whether to hug her or cry. She just handed it to me and said, "Try not to need this again next semester." I nodded. "Thanks." "Anything for my favorite sister," she said with a soft smile, though we both knew she only had one. It wasn't the first time. She'd paid for my car battery the winter it died in the Target parking lot. Helped cover Dad's dental crown when our insurance lapsed. Once, she even sent Charlotte rent money after her retail job fell through, again. Madeline never made it a big deal. But each time, I noticed the toll, an extra line near her eyes, more caffeine, less laughter. That weekend, we gathered at the family house for dinner. The same old split level in East Austin, with the porch light that flickered like it had a grudge. The smell of rosemary chicken and microwaved green beans filled the kitchen. "Rachel, your GPA is up again, right?" Mom beamed as she poured sweet tea into old mason jars. "You always were our quiet achiever." I smiled. "Yeah, I made Dean's List again." "That's wonderful," Dad said gruffly from the head of the table, glancing at his phone between bites. "Madeline, any updates on that app thing you're doing?" Madeline was cutting her steak, carefully, silently. She paused just a second too long before saying, "It's going okay. We're still bootstrapping." Mom reached across to pass the potatoes. "When you get a sec, can you look over the roof estimate from Ace Roofing? I think they're charging too much." "Sure," Madeline said without looking up. That was it. No follow-up. "No, thank you." Just a shift in conversation to Charlotte's latest haircut and the neighbor's new fence. I watched my sister that night. Her plate sat mostly untouched. She smiled when appropriate, laughed politely, and nodded when spoken to. But her shoulders looked tired. Not the kind of tired from lack of sleep, the kind that comes from holding too much for too long. She once told me during a grocery run, "I don't mind helping. I just wish someone would ask if I'm tired." At the time, I didn't think much of it. After dinner, she loaded the dishwasher while Mom chatted about a coupon for new blinds. Dad had already disappeared into the living room with his tablet. I offered to help, but she shook her head. "It's fine," she said. "You've got finals." She handed me a container of leftovers and hugged me lightly at the door. "Drive safe." Back at my dorm, I took the sticky note from my wallet and pressed it flat on the desk. "Keep going." For a long time, I just stared at it. Had anyone ever asked Madeline if she was okay? Madeline sent the invitation on a Tuesday plain white card, her name printed in blue above the words Austin Tech Achievement Award, finalist, Female Entrepreneur of the Year. I'd tossed it onto my kitchen counter beside a stack of ungraded essays. That week, everything felt like a blur. Lesson plans, budget spreadsheets, trying to keep my middle schoolers from throwing erasers at each other. When I finally texted her back, all I wrote was, "Can't make it, school night." It was a lie. Well, not entirely. I had papers to grade, but that wasn't the reason I didn't go. The real reason? I didn't know how to face her success. I didn't know what to wear to a ballroom. I didn't know if I belonged in that kind of glow. The night of the ceremony, I microwaved leftover chili and sat at my kitchen table under a flickering overhead light. I told myself I was being practical, responsible. I opened Instagram while the microwave beeped. There she was, Madeline, sitting at a table set for 8, dressed in navy blue, hair curled, lips painted, alone, smiling somehow. The caption read, "A night I won't forget. For the first time, I believe I deserve this." I stared at the image. A trophy gleamed beside her plate. There was a gift bag under her chair, its tissue paper untouched. And all those empty chairs. Later, another photo went up. Michael had made it, apparently. He was in a suit, leaning in to kiss her cheek. His hand rested on hers under the tablecloth. For a moment, I felt relief. At least she hadn't been entirely alone. Sunday dinner came, as it always did. Mom had overcooked the roast, and Dad was still in his work boots. Charlotte didn't show, texted last minute that the baby had a fever. No one mentioned the award. Madeline sat across from me, still glowing faintly. Not from the spotlight, but from something steadier. Like a candle that had learned to burn without fuel. So I began, trying to sound casual. "How was the—" "Madeline," Mom cut in, passing the bread basket. "Can you look at Charlotte's lease papers sometime this week? She said the new place wants a cosigner." Madeline blinked. Okay. I just think," Mom continued, "since you're more established financially, well, you understand." "Of course," Madeline said. She reached for her water glass. Dad cleared his throat. "And you still working on that online app thing?" "It's not an app," she replied gently. "We provide marketing automation software for—" "That's great," he interrupted. "As long as it keeps the lights on, right?" She smiled politely, took another sip of water, folded her napkin slowly beside her plate. I looked around the table. Everyone was talking about Charlotte's new watercolor class. Apparently, she was painting roses now. The irony was almost comical. Madeline had just won a regional award in a major tech sector, and our family was discussing brushstroke techniques. No one asked how the ceremony went. No one said congratulations. No one even asked to see a photo. Madeline's cheesecake sat untouched. I watched her push her fork across the edge of the plate, then finally set it down. Midway through dessert, she stood. "Thanks for dinner," she said softly. "You're leaving already?" Dad asked. "Early meeting tomorrow," she replied. "And I have a long drive." "Take some leftovers," Mom called from the kitchen. "The roast is still good." Madeline just smiled. "Maybe next time." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Back home, I sat on my bed and stared at my phone. No text from her. None since my vague school night excuse. I picked up my own slice of cheesecake from the kitchen and took one bite. It tasted like dust. I started to wonder what it meant when someone stops asking to be seen. Thanksgiving smelled like cinnamon and wet leaves that year. The front porch still creaked in the same spot it always had, and Mom had taped fake fall leaves around the dining room window again, even though they'd started curling at the edges. I showed up with a bottle of mid-range red and a frozen pecan pie, trying to look composed. Madeline arrived half an hour later, as always on time, not early. She carried a box of pumpkin spice scones from an actual bakery and 2 bottles of non-alcoholic sparkling cider with gold foil at the neck. She wore a dark green wrap dress and boots that looked expensive in the quiet kind of way. Charlotte greeted her with a grin too wide to be sincere. "Look who remembered the holidays," she said, then added loudly, "Hope you brought a slice of those stock options too." The room laughed, except Madeline. She smiled faintly and offered the cider. Dinner unfolded as expected. Mom's mashed potatoes had that slightly instant aftertaste. The turkey was dry at the edges, and Peter spent most of the meal scrolling on his phone under the table. Michael texted that he was running late, work emergency. As we passed dishes around, Dad told a story I'd heard since middle school about how he once got a discount on winter tires by bartering a deer hunting knife. Charlotte showed everyone photos of her kids in matching flannel, and Mom laughed too hard when Peter made a joke about NFTs. Madeline ate slowly, mechanically, her fork movements precise. When the cranberry sauce came to me, it was still cold in the center. I took a bite just as Dad cleared his throat. "Before dessert," he said, setting down his fork, "your mother and I wanted to share something. It's important." I stopped chewing. The cranberry sat heavy in my mouth. "You all know how much we believe in fairness," he began. "We've talked, and we've decided to transfer our shares in Phoenix Works to Charlotte." The room didn't go silent so much as the sound shifted like a bird disappearing mid-song. "She's got the kids," Mom added, smiling toward Charlotte. "And she and Peter are trying to get that little side business off the ground." Charlotte blinked. "Wait, really? That's... wow. Thanks, Mom." "Dad." Madeline didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised. She simply placed her fork down, folded her napkin, and looked at them both. "And me?" she asked. "What about the company I built?" "You'll be fine," Dad said, brushing off the concern. "You always land on your feet. That's your thing." "Exactly," Mom chimed in. "You're so capable, honey." "Charlotte needs the help." The cranberry sauce turned to paste in my throat. I wanted to speak, to say something, but I just sat there. Madeline glanced once at me. Not an accusation, just a question I didn't know how to answer. She stood quietly, took her coat from the back of her chair, gathered the untouched dessert she'd brought and placed it back into its bakery box with calm precision. "No hard feelings," Dad said, as if that settled it. Madeline smiled. Not warmly, just politely, like a guest excusing herself from a dinner she never wanted to attend. "Of course," she said. "Thanks for the meal." "Wait," Mom called. "Don't you want to stay for pie?" Madeline turned slightly at the doorway. "Maybe next year." Then she was gone. No yelling. No slammed doors. Just absence. Michael arrived 10 minutes later, arms full of flowers and a box of chocolate-covered almonds. "Did I miss anything?" he asked, looking around. Everyone shook their heads. I sat there, still holding my fork, still chewing through what had just happened. No one brought it up again. Charlotte started showing videos of her kids doing a dance from TikTok. Dad poured coffee. Mom checked the pie. I kept thinking about that cranberry sauce. How cold it had been in my mouth. How it made me feel sick, but I'd swallowed anyway. By the time I reached the driveway, she was already gone. So was the version of myself I thought was neutral. When Madeline stopped answering our calls, Mom said she was sulking. Dad said she just needed time. Charlotte texted the family group chat 3 times a day, her messages growing more indignant and insistent. Tuition is due. Who's paying the mortgage this month? Peter says this is ridiculous. The silence, I realized, wasn't just from Madeline. It was everywhere, a space filling the house, cold and heavy as winter. Outside, North Austin was in its grayest mood. The trees were bare, and a chill clung to the apartment walls. It was the kind of weather that made you crave warmth, except warmth was exactly what I'd lost. I made tea in the kitchen, holding the mug with both hands, waiting for it to cool just enough so the heat wouldn't burn. My phone buzzed, the group chat lighting up again. Charlotte's latest message: if Madeline won't answer, one of you needs to step up. Don't make me go there. There were 5 unread voicemails from Mom. I played one on speaker, letting her voice fill the small space. We were just trying to help Charlotte. Honey, she pleaded. She's having such a hard time. We never meant to hurt anyone. Please call me back. Your father's worried sick. But I didn't want to call back. I didn't know what I'd say if I did. Instead, I bundled myself in a scarf and drove to Harvest Blend, the cafe on Anderson Lane that Madeline and I used to go to every couple of weeks. The place hadn't changed. Chalkboard menu, mismatched mugs, the same indie folk playlist in the background. I ordered Madeline's old favorite oat milk latte, extra cinnamon, just to see what it felt like. The barista called my name, and I noticed the daily specials. Madeline's maple oat latte was still up there, in tiny pink chalk. I sat in the corner and tried to read, but the pages blurred. The clink of cups, the buzz of conversation, every detail reminded me that Madeline was absent. No, not absent. She was present in the emptiness, in the places she used to fill. A memory rose, clear as day, Madeline laughing at something dumb I'd said, her eyes shining, not yet tired. No one listens until you disappear, she used to say, half joking, half true. I'd always thought she was exaggerating. Now I wasn't so sure. Back at my apartment, the sky was already dark even though it was barely 6. There was a small brown package leaning against my door, no return address, just my name and Madeline's neat handwriting. Inside was a Polaroid photo. Me and Madeline, arms around each other, standing on the sidewalk with our backpacks from the first day of middle school. I hadn't seen that picture in years. Taped to the back was a yellow sticky note. You always saw me, Ratch. I hope you still do. The words split something open inside me. I sat on the floor and let myself cry, really cry, for the first time in years. Not for Madeline, not for the family, but for the version of myself who'd always looked the other way. Who thought that being neutral was the same as being kind. I kept the photo in my lap as I pulled out my laptop. I stared at the blank screen, heart pounding. My fingers hovered over the keys. I wanted to write Madeline a letter. I wanted to explain, apologize, say something real. But when I started typing, what came out was just 4 lines. They weren't for her. They were for me. I was there and I was quiet. Now the quiet's all I hear. The weight you carried wasn't yours. But I carried it too by standing near. I saved the file, hands shaking. For the first time, the words felt like my own. Before bed, I went into my phone settings and found the group chat. I turned off notifications and set the whole thread to silent. It was a tiny act of defiance, a line drawn in digital sand. Somewhere in the apartment, the heater rattled to life. I curled up on the couch with Madeline's Polaroid and let myself hope that silence, for once, could be a beginning. Charlotte showed up at my door on a Saturday morning, fury written all over her face. She didn't text first. She just banged on the wood, loud enough that the neighbor's dog barked. I opened the door, coffee in hand, and stared at her through the screen. "You need to talk to her." Charlotte snapped, not bothering with hello. "You think you can just ignore everything? She ruined everything, Rachel. You think she's a saint? You're as bad as she is." For the first time in my life, I didn't move aside to let her in. I just stood there, the mugwort between my palms, feeling the quiet rise up in me like a shield. I took a breath. "No, Charlotte. I don't think she's a saint. But I think she finally stopped bleeding for people who called it love." She gaped at me, stunned. Maybe at my words, maybe because I'd never contradicted her before. "You're siding with her now?" "I'm not siding with anyone," I said, calm and certain in a way that felt completely new. "I'm setting a boundary. I don't want to be part of the cycle anymore." Charlotte shook her head, lips curling in a way that once would have made me apologize. "You're unbelievable," she hissed, and turned on her heel, stomping down the walkway in a flurry of indignation. I watched her go, feeling neither anger nor guilt, just a strange, light sense of relief. Spring had finally come to Austin, the air full of warm breezes and the hum of bees. Wildflowers pressed against every patch of green along the sidewalk. The city, after months of gray, was waking up again. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a note to Madeline, handwriting shaky but determined. "I saw you. I see you now. I'm sorry I was quiet." I didn't know if she would write back. That was okay. This note was as much for me as it was for her. Later, Michael stopped by, bringing a bag of breakfast tacos and the kind of easy company that needed no explanation. We ate on the balcony, watching sunlight creep up the walls of neighboring buildings. He squeezed my hand, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with apologies. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, eyes kind. "Drawing lines is hard. It's easier to stay tangled up." "I'm not sure what happens next," I admitted. He smiled. "That's the best part. You get to decide." That weekend, I attended my first group therapy session for adult siblings from dysfunctional families. The church basement smelled like lemon cleaner and hope. Folding chairs in a loose circle, people's faces both nervous and open. When my turn came, I hesitated, then spoke one sentence. I thought being silent meant I wasn't part of the harm. I was wrong. Afterward, walking home beneath the bright spray of wildflowers growing through the cracks in the sidewalk, I passed a mural I'd never noticed before. Painted in bold colors, it read, "Grow wild, not obedient." I stopped, smiled, and for the first time, really felt the truth of it settle in my bones. Back in my apartment, the urge to check the family group chat tugged at me. The screen glowed with a dozen unread messages, demands, complaints, pleas. My thumb hovered, then I pressed and held, selecting delete. I did it not in anger, but with a sense of peace. The world didn't collapse. I just breathed. It felt like taking off a jacket I'd been wearing since childhood, one that never really fit. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter, cream-colored and elegant, addressed in Madeline's familiar handwriting. I stared at it for a full minute before picking it up, running my thumb over the curves of each letter. For years, her notes had been bills slipped under doors, sticky reminders, quiet encouragements. This one felt like something different, something more open, an invitation, not an obligation. Inside, the card read, "No pressure. There's space for you if you'd like." Below, in her looping script, was the venue, Hillcrest Vineyard, late fall. The simple note carried none of the family weight that had dogged us for years. For the first time, Madeline was asking, not expecting, not demanding, not apologizing. Just asking. On the morning of the wedding, golden leaves danced along the driveway as I pulled up to the vineyard outside Austin. The sun hung low, turning the world honey-warm. Lanterns hung from the branches of sprawling oak trees, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of pumpkin bread and wood smoke. I clutched the invitation in my lap, heart hammering for reasons I couldn't quite name. I chose a simple navy dress, flat shoes, and no jewelry, nothing to draw attention, nothing to hide behind. There was no assigned seating, just long wooden benches set out under the open sky. I slipped in quietly, settling near the pie table where slices of apple, pecan, and pumpkin sat waiting, cinnamon rising warm from their crusts. Guests spoke in low voices, laughter soft, music drifting from a violinist tuning up for the ceremony. I watched Madeline, radiant in a tea-length white dress, walk down the aisle under the amber leaves. Michael stood at the altar, eyes shining with quiet love. There were no grand speeches, no choreographed dances, just gentle hands, shy smiles, and the simple vow to build a life rooted in something honest. Mom and Dad arrived late and sat near the back, their faces pale and polite. They left before the first dance, offering small hugs and measured words. I watched them go, feeling a mixture of sorrow and relief, like stepping out of a shadow that had once stretched over both of us. The ceremony ended, and Madeline found me by the pie table, carrying 2 mugs of cinnamon coffee. She handed one to me, her fingers warm on mine. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice steady. I held her gaze. "Thank you for asking." We stood there for a moment, neither filling the silence nor rushing to fix it. She once told me she'd want a wedding with fewer speeches, more silence that felt like love. This was exactly that. All around us, leaves crackled underfoot, and "Here Comes the Sun" drifted from the violin. For the first time, it felt like enough to just exist together. Later, as the lanterns glowed against the evening and Madeline danced with Michael under the trees, I watched from the edge. I wasn't invisible anymore, but I wasn't in the spotlight either. I felt whole, exactly where I was. A slice of pumpkin bread in hand, I breathed in the scent of cinnamon and cider. The air was full of golden light, laughter floating like music. All the noise of old expectations had faded, replaced by a gentle hum of possibility. Maybe I didn't build the company, but I'm building something too. This time, it's me. As I watched Madeline and Michael dance under the golden lights, I felt a quiet sense of peace for both of us and for the space we finally allowed ourselves to claim. Life rarely gives us perfect endings, but sometimes, learning to listen and to honor our own journey is the greatest gift we can give our loved ones and ourselves. If there's one lesson I carry from this, it's that real love means seeing each other fully, not just for what we give, but for who we are. In family and in life, setting healthy boundaries is not selfish. It's an act of respect, both ways. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll share your own thoughts or memories below. Sometimes, a simple story can remind us how kindness, understanding, and a little courage can light the way home.